Super. Well, thank you all for coming to watch Tom deliver his speech today on nutrition and mental health. We're delighted to welcome Tom back for a second year, and I hope you enjoyed the talk. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Katie. Right. Fantastic. Before I get going, I just want to do the classic double check that you can see my screen all okay.
Yeah, everything working.
Fantastic. Great. Okay. Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Katie. As Katie said, my name is Tom Gurney. I'm a lecturer at University College London, based at the Institute of Sport and Exercise and Health, where my research is mainly focused on nutrition and supplements, and investigating whether they're whether we can have an impact on a variety of health parameters, but also from an exercise perspective as well. Very recently, I've been working at looking at how creatine supplementation can impact cognitive function in night shift workers, and I have a couple studies ongoing at the moment in this area. I'm currently the Year 1 academic lead for sports and exercise medical sciences at UCL, and I also do some consultancy stuff on the side as well. So I'm going to be talking to you all today about nutrition and brain health, using interchangeable terms such as mental health and cognitive function as well. And the talk is roughly split into 4 parts. So I'm going to be introducing the very new scientific domain, which is otherwise known as nutritional psychiatry, and then slowly be integrating what the impact of nutrition is for our brain health and mental well-being, as well as describing some best food choices which can be excellent for supporting our mental health. And then at the end, I absolutely have to include a little bit of information about the intricate relationship between exercise, nutrition, and brain health as well. So I think first and foremost, the most important thing for me to discuss with you is what we really mean by nutritional psychiatry. As I discussed on the first slide, it's relatively new in terms of the scientific domain. We have had an increase in mental health disorders rising over the last few years, and consequently, a growing number of scientists are trying to find new ways in which we can mitigate against or combat against these mental disorders. And one of these is a nutritional approach. So the words nutritional psychiatry is nutrition, so food, and then psychiatry, which is our brain. So investigating whether we can have an influence on our mental well-being from food itself. Brains are very complex, and it's a very difficult area to research because of how little we actually know about the brain in comparison to everywhere else in the body. Initially, scientists were thinking about recommended daily allowances and thinking about, well, how could we use them to support our brain? But actually, these recommended daily allowances are pretty useless for us because they were initially started in the 1940s in the Second World War to support the health of our troops. And so currently, no such RDAs exist for the brain, not yet at least. And so hopefully, there's a lot of exciting research going on across the world. And I think one day we might eventually get there. So that's a little bit of an introduction into the emerging field of nutritional psychiatry. And over the next sort of few minutes, I'll be discussing this in a little bit more detail and the common themes in which the research seems to be going at the moment. But as I've described to you, the brain is an incredibly taxing organ that we have. It only weighs about 2% of our total body mass, yet it consumes over 20% of our resting energy expenditure. So it's an incredibly complex organ. If you think about it right now, it is always working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Okay, it facilitates our breathing, our heart rate, all of our senses. But this means that our brain requires a constant supply of fuel. And this fuel comes in the form of foods that we eat. And so making sure that this fuel, i.e. food that we eat, is really, really important with regards to how the high quality it should be. I like to think of the brain as a little bit like a supercar, in so much that we always need to keep it topped up with fuel, and this fuel needs to be of high quality. So eating high quality foods that contain lots of vitamins and minerals can help support the brain with regards to its function, and of course the formation of new neurons as well, which I'll get on to talk about in a little bit in some few slides time. But essentially a good little example here is down at the bottom. Lots of vitamins and minerals play an important role in helping us produce neurotransmitters such as serotonin, which we know are really important for facilitating our learning, memory, and happiness. So what is the impact and role of nutrition and brain health? Well, all aspects of nutrition, whether this malnutrition, so low calories consumption, or obesity, are closely intertwined with mood regulation and stress. So which in turn will impact our general well-being and metabolism. So you can see here on the right-hand side of this figure that foods high in refined sugars and high fat have been shown to impair brain function and even worsen symptoms of mood disorders such as depression. Overeating may also increase or exacerbate stress levels, both from a physiological perspective, but from a psychological perspective as well, as it causes this rapid increase in blood sugar levels, which your body must promptly then regulate. And the next slide, I've got a really nice figure, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail. But conversely, specific nutrients such as vitamins, minerals, polyphenols, antioxidants, have been associated with improving cognitive function, particularly as we start to get older. And if you think about how important that is, the population is becoming an older generation. And so this can be really impactful for the future if we can start making these positive changes now when it comes on to maybe mitigating the negative effects of maybe Alzheimer's, for example. And so these types of healthy foods will help support our brain to communicate and produce new neurons, which we know are really important for memory and general brain function. So this figure here is further demonstrating how important regulating our blood sugar levels are. And I absolutely love this type of figure because the more you look at it, the more detailed it becomes. But I'll briefly go through it for you now. And you can see in the green dash blood sugar where our brain and body optimize or function optimally, sorry. So you can see that as we eat a sugary food, our blood sugar levels will spike, okay? And this will cause a good feeling at first. But of course, in order to cope and deal with that increase in blood sugar, we then need to release insulin into the blood to then help remove that blood sugar and causing any serious consequences from having such a high blood sugar. This then, unfortunately, leads to a crash in sensation. So I like to describe this usually as a good example is children, for example, having some sweets and then a couple hours time having a massive crash, feeling tired and pretty grumpy with you. And so we then turn, unfortunately, to having another snack to counteract this effect, and then this continuous cycle happens possibly throughout the day if this is something in which you try to cope with, for example, in a stressful environment. And this will unfortunately result in weight gain because of these high sugar or high calorie sugary foods, and then eventually can have a cascading events of mood swings and ultimately depression as well. And so you can see here in this figure how tightly regulated our blood sugar levels need to be to ensure that we have indeed. One of the key relationships between diets is, of course, physical health as well. And there is a nice study by Firth et al. In 2020 that described this triangular almost relationship between a good quality diet, our own physical health, and of course mental health as well. So note that I haven't even started to talk about exercise in general here, but generally speaking, if we can have a good quality diet, so foods with healthy fats, limited fast foods, and fruits and vegetables, this can also impact a range of factors such as our cravings and habits, and of course our psychological factors as well, such as social as well. And I'll be talking about some of the social factors in a couple of slides time. But before I get onto that, I wanted to talk about one of the key areas in our brain, which is the hippocampus. Now, the hippocampus itself is associated with mood, memory, and learning. And this is where we also produce new neurons. And these neurons are really important for helping us, our brains, to communicate effectively to one another across the synapse clefts. But also because the hippocampus has been linked to cognition and moods, researchers have been really interested in seeing, well, how can we impact our cognition and moods via diet? And so there's been some research by Stangl and Furet in 2009, which suggested that actually there might be 4 factors which may modulate the hippocampus from diet specifically. And this might be meal texture. So chewing versus liquid diets. They looked at some research on that. How high or low our calories are in our diet, our meal frequency, and also our meal content. I spoke about how important thinking about the social factors are from eating. And now, for full disclosure, I'm not a social scientist, but the impact of eating with individuals is pretty strong. Survey data generally suggests that people who eat socially are more likely to feel better about themselves and have a wider social network. This network can then help provide social and emotional support to one another. In 2017 suggested that this one makes you feel closer than eating with individuals maybe at breakfast and lunchtime, which is quite an interesting outcome from the study. But I appreciate it's not as simple as this, not least thinking about family squabbles, for example. You've also got the pressures of maybe eating in a canteen at work with maybe people that you may not necessarily want to sit next to. And of course, for those individuals who might not have the opportunity to eat socially due to their working environments as well. So it's a little bit more complex than just simply saying, let's just sit down with someone and eat. But it's important factor to consider for our mental well-being. I'm going to talk about food choices now, and this is quite a complex area because, as you'll notice in a couple minutes' time, I'm going to try and explain to you how actually do we have much choice in our food. It's not as simple as recommending some healthy foods for you. Now, that's not to say I'm not going to recommend some healthy foods, because that's certainly what I'm going to do a bit later on. But it's important that there is a lot of factors which take into consideration how much choice we may actually have with food. And this has become particularly more problematic in modern society. There is an increasing amount of ultra processed foods being provided to us on shelves in the supermarkets now, but also we live in a very busy and stressful world. If you think about the general working day, seems to almost be 24 hours now rather than just the usual 9 till 5. And so this increase in stress from internal factors, but also external factors, can actually impact how much choice we actually have when it comes to eating food. And this can actually have quite a significant impact, particularly when we look at this example here, where we've got one stressful situation, so a negative situation, and then one positive situation where they both lead to an increase in cravings or overconsumption of some sort of food. And so this desire for rewards, which is a really interesting area to talk about, is this constant cycle of, regardless of the positive or negative situation, there is this reward associated with eating as well. And then this can, of course, have an impact on our mental well-being. The chemical which is associated with our reward is dopamine. But before I talk about that, what is really interesting is this figure here, which essentially summarizes the example that I provided just then. Both a positive and negative cue can impact how we feel mentally, but of course then both of those examples can cause us to crave foodstuffs, particularly these high processed foodstuffs. And then of course we eat, and then by the time we then eat, we have this amazing feeling of feeling better, but then this reinforcement cycle then starts to become stronger, and then so that we have this constant cycle of either negative or positive cues impacting our food choice. So what chemical reinforces these behaviors? Well, I briefly just mentioned about dopamine, and this brain chemical is a neurotransmitter. It's responsible for transmitting signals between nerve cells in the brain, as well as other multiple functions. So in this way, it directly affects our brain's reward and pleasure centers, which in turn will ultimately affect our mood. So the activation of dopamine occurs for a number of reasons, but one of these is this sudden availability of highly palatable foods. It's been suggested, and there is emerging evidence to say that people who are overweight or obese may have disruptions in how this dopamine neurotransmitter works. And this is because this mechanism may have been blunted through this constant exposure of highly palatable foods. So these overweight and obese individuals are having to consume more and more highly palatable foods to get the same dopamine response, that same reward associated behavior with eating. So what foods might then optimize our brain health and cognitive function? Well, in the contention of healthy food choices, such as higher fruit and vegetable consumption, it is associated with greater happiness and well-being. But this also is similar for eating unhealthy foods. And so as consumers, we always have this constant trade-off for foods which we think will make us feel better. But there's emerging evidence to suggest that in the long run, these healthier food choices will, of course, have this cascade in beneficial physiological effects in the future too, as well. Okay, such as reducing the chances of obesity and various other diseases. So, foods high in fiber can contribute to a good gut microbiome, which has been linked, of course, as well to cognition and mood. And you'll notice that if you look at this figure, this is starting to look very similar to a Mediterranean diet. So looking at specific diets, okay. Healthy fats are also really good for reducing inflammation in our brain, but also across our whole body as well. And then the phytonutrients, so the antioxidants can help protect against antioxidant stress, and then of course any metabolic damage that may occur as well, particularly as we start to get a bit older. So specific diets, there's been some research to compare the traditional Western diet, which we all seem to consume quite a lot, in comparison to the Mediterranean diet. And it's been shown that it can reduce the risk of depression by up to 35%, so quite substantial. There's also two diets which have been in the literature recently, and that is the MIND diet, which primarily focuses on cognitive function, and then the DASH diet as well, which is also to do with heart health. I've got an example of the types of foods in which we should consider for the MIND diet. And this, again, if you look closely, is following similar to the Mediterranean diet. So lots of oily, healthy, fatty fish, poultry, whole grains rather than simple carbohydrates such as white pasta, for example. So making that food choice. Lots of berries, beans, okay, and unfortunately down at the bottom, having cheese maybe only once a week, which is a real shame because I love cheese. Or we've got pastries and sweets as well, which is less than 5 times a week as well. So it's trying to find this balance between selecting an appropriate diet that works for you as an individual, but also what the impact that might have on your brain as well. And these are some early investigations which have started to be quite promising as well. But in summary, all of these diets seem to contribute to the overall well-being of an individual. And therefore, we know that if we can improve our overall well-being, this reduces our risk of diseases. And of course, then in turn, will indirectly support our mental well-being as well and brain function. So these brain healthy foods, which I've given you an example of in these diets, can really help support our cognitive health, particularly as we start to get a little bit older as well. Now, I can't come on here and not talk about supplements because it's a really important area to talk to you guys about. But there is a vast amount of supplements that may claim will support your brain health. There's a lot of promising research out there, and there's lots of companies trying to produce, an optimal supplement perfect for the brain. Um, but there's lots of considerations you need to think about before you go and reach for a supplement. I've listed some up on the screen here for you now, which seem to have some relatively good evidence for improving mood and helping with stress, and the same for energy. And as I've already spoken about earlier when I introduced myself, I'm currently looking at creatine and how this might impact cognitive function following a lack of sleep in healthcare workers. What is really important, though, is to consider the cost and efficacy ratio. So how well does it work? And also from an individual perspective, if you have any current medications that might interact with a supplement, it's important for you to talk to your GP. What I really want to hammer home here, though, is that there is no magic pill for improving our mental well-being and cognitive function. Usually, most nutritionists will talk about a food first approach, and that's making sure that you eat healthy foods first before maybe you turn to supplements. But I appreciate that those of us that may work in environments where there are canteens, so there's lack of food choice, and or if we're particularly time poor, then we may want to turn to supplements to help facilitate our brains from function to function optimally. It's also really important to consider when we talk about diet and food choice is that no one is perfect, and particularly if we think about the holidays approaching, so we've got Easter approaching soon, you're going to want to indulge in a little bit of chocolate if that's something that suits you. All right, so the more you start to become obsessed with whole foods and eating perfectly, the more chance you're going to start developing some form of food disorder or eating disorder, and that will lead to, of course, an increase in anxiety as well. So it's really delicate to make sure that we have a balance between whole foods and then, of course, some indulgent from here from time to time as well. The final little section I wanted to talk about today with you all was the impact of exercise, nutrition, and of course that then on brain health as well. We know that a sedentary lifestyle will consequently lead to overweight and obesity, and that has also been linked to mental disorders as well. And so there's a lot of really interesting interventions that are trying to now look at this combined effect of nutrition and exercise to try and improve our mental health. It's well known that exercise by itself has a really positive impact on depressive symptoms and stress. Okay, it really helps with us regulating our emotions and well-being. It helps us get to sleep at night, and of course just generally increase how energetic we feel from day to day. And so this is where things start to get a little bit exciting, because we know how important physical activity is, but then we also know how important having a healthy diet is for our brain. And so I sort of like to think of this as sort of the golden triangle, where we have a healthy diet combined with a lot of physical activity can really help contribute to this optimizing brain function and mental well-being. So the example that you've got down here is, of course, the Mediterranean diet, but it doesn't have to be strictly the Mediterranean diet. It could just be simply making just better food choices slowly rather than extremely, I think, which is really important. With regards to exercise and how this might impact the brain, well, we know that when we exercise, we increase oxygenated blood to the brain. The brain starts to wake up a little bit when we exercise. This in turn can reduce inflammation, improve and increase the amount of neurons that start to be generated in the hippocampus. And therefore, we have then this cascade of improvements in our own physical health, but then, of course, our brain health as well. There's also a lot of research by Tortalla et al. In 2021 that also came at it from more of a protective element or angle. And this was, again, looking at various factors in which we can modify to provide protective factors to the brain. And of course, we've got nutrition here. Okay, so the impact of nutrition on our cognitive process and general mental well-being. And of course, again, the physical activity element. And in this area and in this figure, we've also got restful sleep. And I spoke about in a couple of slides previously about how having a good physical and nutritional discipline can also help with our sleep as well. So these are all interlinked and contribute to improving our mental well-being as well. I absolutely love this figure on the left-hand side graph by Hillman et al. In 2009, who actually did this really cool study where they did some brain imaging. You can see in the blue demonstrates little activity, and in the red, we've got a lot of activity happening in the brain. So you can see how just sitting quietly for 20 we have little activity going on in the brain. Okay, we might have a little bit, but then going for a walk and then looking at our brain activity, you can see how we've got a massive increase in activity. And I always like to sort of show this slide to students or any individuals revising for exams, because it just shows how important going for a walk, just simply a quick walk, can do with waking up your brain. And so taking lots of break can be really important where possible. And it's the same for maybe going to the gym on your lunch break if you've got the time to as well. But what's really exciting is there was a paper published literally just a couple of weeks ago by some colleagues at the Institute of Sport and Exercise and Health. So Dr. Flaminia Ronka was involved in this study, whereby they actually demonstrated that the fatter you are, so the higher your body fat percentage, the lower the activation is in your brain. So we've spoken about how important having optimal food choices are, but this figure here just demonstrates that actually, whilst those who've got a low body fat percentage, there is a good improvement in our brain activity. Those who have a higher fat percentage, their brains don't actually wake up quite so much or show so much activity after doing some exercise. So really, really important to try and control our body fat percentage as best as possible as to well-being. And then the final figure I wanted to show you all today is on the right-hand side graph. I appreciate this one's a little bit more complicated, but what I really wanted to hammer home is that it's not just aerobic exercise that is beneficial for our brain. So on the left-hand side of this figure here, we've got resistance exercise training. All right, so lifting weights can also have this cascade and beneficial effects for improving our brain function and our general mental well-being. And at the bottom here, you've also got how it can help improve our memory. So what can you do? Well, I think what's important and a clear take-home message from me is try and modify the modifiable factors. So things like diet and physical activity, I've spoken a lot about today, okay? Social engagement can also be really important, and try and limit as best as possible your smoking and alcohol consumption. What's also important to consider is that we need to think about individuals from different aspects of life. So different age categories and also context is really important as well. So depending on your lifestyle currently and the type of work that you might be doing, we need to think about individualized responses. And usually that's best worked out by the individual, so yourselves. So in brief summary then, there's a lot of promising research to suggest that intervention studies such as diet as well as exercise can really help with the prevention and treatment of mental health disorders. But it is really important that this is just one aspect to consider. There are factors that we can't control, such as genetics and or our environment as a child. And so this can also have some significant roles too. The last thing I wanted to mention is that if someone is struggling with their mental health, it is really important for them to seek professional support from a healthcare provider who specializes in mental health. Thank you very much for listening.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tom. There's an awful lot of information there, but definitely a lot of takeaways as well in terms of how you can actually make these small changes that could make a massive difference.
Yeah, definitely. And thankfully, you know, as these are recorded, they can go back and watch things in as slow as time if they wanted to.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think the most difficult thing is behavior change. That is the key. Yeah. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tom. Really appreciate your time again, and we will be in touch soon.
Fantastic. Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Heather. Have a good rest of your
All
day.
right. Thanks, Tom.
Bye
Bye.
now. Bye bye.